fading autumn sun spilled its final amber glow through the delicate curtains, stretching shadows across the sitting room. Margaret Hale paused beside the window, fastening her dark blue coat, her silhouette barely visible in the glass. At 63, she had become accustomed to quietness, the sort that lingered after her husband's departure from this world. But this evening wasn't designed for quietness. This evening meant supper at her son Daniel's residence, an occasion she anticipated with gentle excitement. She wandered through her home with careful deliberation, triple verifying everything the manner only widows practice when solitude is their companion. The entrance door bolt fastened twice, the rear window sealed with a whisper. She even pressed her lips to the mounted photograph of her departed husband, Richard, before departing, a ritual she would never forsake. Her house carried the subtle aroma of lavender wax and aged timber, the reassuring fragrance of lifetimes past. The timepiece chimed 6. She grinned, gathered her blueberry tart, and ventured into the crisp dusk. The world beyond appeared tranquil, and unaware that within mere hours her residence would cease feeling like her refuge. Supper at Daniel's overflowed with merriment and affection. Leela, her daughter-in-law, danced between the cooking area and dining space, perpetually beaming a touch too flawlessly. Daniel's tone was jovial, but Margaret observed he examined his phone excessively, something that pulled gently at her spirit. Nevertheless, she dismissed it. This evening, she was merely a mother encircled by kin. Then her phone vibrated on the surface. The display showed Rosa, her housekeeping assistant. Margaret nearly dismissed it, but the quiver in Rosa's tone delivered a frost through her bones. "Mrs. Hale," Rosa breathed. "Someone has entered your residence." For a pulse, Margaret couldn't shift. "What are you saying?" she questioned, her tone scarcely audible. "I spotted them beyond the cooking area window," Rosa faltered. "A silhouette tall, wearing gloves. I assumed you were inside, but the illumination was extinguished." The tart transformed to lead in Margaret's abdomen. She had secured everything she was certain she had. Yet Rosa wouldn't confuse something of this nature. "Depart from there," Margaret commanded, her tone fragmenting. "Leave immediately. Contact the authorities." As the conversation concluded, Margaret's pulse thundered in her chest. Surrounding her, Daniel's amusement dissolved into the background. The evening that had commenced with affection now carried the taste of iron and terror. The hushed house she'd abandoned was no longer merely a dwelling. It had transformed into a stranger's mystery. By the moment Margaret arrived at her avenue, pulsing sapphire and crimson illumination colored the darkness. Her pulse hammered as the authorities navigated through her front garden, their devices crackling. The formerly serene house now encircled by officers. She remained paralyzed by the entrance gate, the blueberry tart still gripped in her shaking hands, its crust fractured like her composure. "Mrs. Hale, please remain back," one of the officers stated softly. "We're ensuring it's secure inside." She acknowledged mutely. Her dwelling, her protected, tranquil sanctuary, was now an investigation site. After what seemed like eternities, the officer reappeared. "No one's present now," he reported. "Appears they departed in haste." When Margaret entered inside, her respiration halted. Compartments had been yanked open. Picture holders rested splintered on the surface, and her husband's former workspace, the single chamber she still maintained pristine, had been pillaged. It wasn't merely a robbery. It was a desecration. "What did they remove?" Daniel inquired gently, positioning a hand on her shoulder. Margaret's gaze surveyed the chaos. The television was still present. The silver utensils remained intact, but the modest jewelry container that rested on her bureau vanished. The timepiece Richard wore daily before his death absent. A container of aged correspondence she'd concealed beneath her mattress disappeared too. Exclusively items that signified something to her. The police officer's brow furrowed. "It's peculiar," he stated, recording notes in his notebook. "Whoever executed this wasn't pursuing currency or electronics. They understood what to retrieve." Margaret's throat constricted. The atmosphere in the chamber felt denser, almost stifling. When she rotated to respond, her vision met Leela's, her daughter-in-law positioned near the entrance, her gaze shifting anxiously toward the damaged compartments. "You all right?" Leela, Daniel inquired. She manufactured a grin. "Just startled. That's everything. Who would execute something of this nature?" Margaret desired to trust her. She required to trust her. But something in Leela's inflection, too airy, too rehearsed, disturbed her. Later that darkness, after the authorities had departed, Margaret occupied her vacant sitting room. The scent of particles and fingerprints remained in the atmosphere. Daniel proposed to remain, but she maintained she'd be adequate. When the entrance finally sealed behind him, she permitted the tears to emerge. The aged house groaned, the timepiece ticking audibly in the hush. Every noise felt questionable, every silhouette too elongated. Her haven had been invaded not for currency, not for possessions, but for fragments of her history. And profoundly within, something informed her this wasn't arbitrary. Someone near had executed this someone who comprehended where to search. 3 sunrises elapsed, yet Margaret couldn't dismiss the discomfort. Every groan of the planks, every murmur of breeze beyond, resonated like footfalls. Slumber arrived in portions shallow, tormented by the vision of someone sifting through her recollections. The authorities had no fresh directions. Probably a random intrusion, they stated, but Margaret understood superior. Then, on the 4th dawn, she discovered an envelope in her postal container. Simple, unmarked, no postage, no sender location, just her designation. Mrs. Hale inscribed in unknown ink. Her digits trembled as she unsealed it. Within was her husband's timepiece, the identical one that had disappeared from her bedside surface. And below it, a photograph. In the image, her daughter-in-law Leela radiated brilliantly at a gathering, the stolen sapphire necklace shimmering around her neck. Margaret's respiration halted. Her knees nearly surrendered. The world tilted, her pulse aching with disbelief and rage. Leela, the woman she'd embraced into her family, the woman she trusted. She drove directly to her son's residence, fury and heartbreak blazing behind her tranquil face. Daniel welcomed her warmly, but his grin wavered when he witnessed the timepiece in her hand. "Where did you obtain that?" he inquired. "It arrived in the postal delivery," Margaret stated quietly, sliding the photograph across the surface. "Examine it, Daniel." His gaze flickered over the image, confusion transforming into disbelief. "That's impossible," he commenced, then halted. "Mother, this must be an error. Perhaps it's manipulated." Manipulated. Margaret's tone trembled with restrained anguish. "Do you believe I'd fabricate something of this nature?" Daniel dragged a hand through his hair. "Mother, I'm merely stating Leela wouldn't execute that. You're distressed. You're mourning. Perhaps someone's attempting to disturb you." The words severed deeper than she anticipated. Her own son, her flesh and blood, believed she was confused. The identical boy she'd nurtured alone after his father died now gazed at her as though she were delicate crystal. She consumed the obstruction in her throat and forced an acknowledgement. "You're correct, dear. Perhaps I'm overreacting." But internally, something solidified. That darkness, Margaret occupied her cooking area surface long after the moon had ascended elevated. The photograph rested before her, the necklaces gleamed taunting her beneath the lamplight. She traced the image with trembling digits, her mind transitioning from sorrow to determination. She wouldn't confront Leela again. Not with words. Words could be distorted. She would locate proof. The following dawn, she visited a modest electronics establishment and purchased 2 inconspicuous cameras, one for the corridor, another for the sitting room. She installed them herself, meticulously concealing them into the angles where they'd remain unnoticed. Then she commenced her performance, the role she never anticipated she'd portray. The absent-minded widow, the gentle, trusting mother-in-law. She invited Leela over for beverages, beaming as if nothing had transpired. "Oh, I've been so absent-minded recently," she stated with a nervous chuckle. "Sometimes I even neglect to activate the security system." Leela's gaze flickered for merely a moment. It was everything Margaret required. Behind her tranquil grin, retribution was quietly taking formation. 2 darknesses later, Margaret initiated her strategy into action. She contacted Daniel to inform him she'd be departing for supper again at Mrs. Turner's residence this occasion, she'd stated, ensuring Leela overheard the discussion on speaker. Leela smiled faintly, her gaze composed, but Margaret detected the minute twitch in her digits as she extended for her cup of beverages. That dusk, Margaret didn't travel to Mrs. Turner's. She positioned her automobile at the angle of her own avenue. Engine extinguished, illumination dimmed. The house stood in obscurity, hushed and expectant, as though it too was awaiting for the reality to return. At precisely 9:37 p.m., an illumination flickered within faint, momentary Her respiration stilled. Through the reflection of her lateral mirror, she witnessed a silhouette navigate across the window. Leela, her daughter-in-law, attired in ebony, a flashlight in one hand, gloves on both. Composed, assured, like she'd executed it previously. Margaret's chest blazed with a mixture of fury and heartbreak, but she remained motionless, hushed, recording everything from her phone as the concealed cameras captured every moment within. Leela proceeded directly to the jewelry compartment, no hesitation then, to the modest secured chest beneath the mattress. She pried it unsealed, pocketed something, and departed. The following dawn, Margaret examined the recording. It was everything present clear as daylight. Leela, the thief. Leela, the betrayer. But Margaret didn't contact the authorities. She possessed a superior strategy. She invited Daniel and Leela to supper that very darkness. She prepared their preferred roasted poultry, arranged the surface with her finest porcelain, and even dispensed red wine into crystal vessels. The atmosphere felt dense, like preceding a tempest. As they consumed, Leela was unusually animated. Discussing vacation strategies and fresh jewelry concepts she was motivated to create. Daniel beamed, unaware, content to witness his family united again. After dessert, Margaret elevated quietly and stated, "I'd appreciate to display you both something." She activated the television. The display flickered to existence, and there she was, Leela intruding into the house, her face exposed, her gloved hands unsealing Margaret's compartments. The chamber descended silent, except for Daniel's acute inhalation. "What is this?" he stammered. Leela's face evacuated of pigment. "That's not me," she commenced, but her tone fractured. Margaret gazed at her, gaze steady, tone composed. "You stole from me, Leela, but inferior than that. You stole my confidence. You stole my family's tranquility." Leela attempted to petition, extending for Daniel's arm, but he withdrew away. His face was pallid, astounded, as though the ground had vanished beneath him. "Depart," he stated quietly. "Just leave." Leela's tears arrived too delayed. She fled out of the house, abandoning behind the final fragments of her deception. Margaret didn't pursue. She merely occupied back downward, her pulse weighty, but strangely weightless. She hadn't shouted, hadn't condemned. Justice didn't require to be harsh, just honest. In the weeks that pursued, Daniel apologized repeatedly. He assisted her repair the entrance, restore the destruction, and promised to safeguard what remained of their connection. Leela's betrayal circulated through whispers in the neighborhood until it was no longer a concealment. One dawn, Rosa inquired softly, "Do you experience more protected now, Mrs. Hale?" Margaret gazed out the window, sunlight cascading over her garden, and smiled faintly. "Yes," she stated, "because tranquility isn't the absence of betrayal. It's the bravery to confront it." And as she nourished the roses that dawned the identical ones her husband once cultivated, she realized retribution didn't perpetually require to thunder. Sometimes it blossomed quietly in the pulse that refused to surrender.